Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. It's August, and boy, what a chanterelle season this is shaping up to be. I'm going to start today with some older footage from mid-July and work right up to present day, so stick around till the end. Let's jump into this forest. Let's see what we see. What a beautiful day out here in the forest of the Pacific Northwest. I tell you, in spite of this forest being just bone dry, the chanterelles have been out in force and earlier than I've ever encountered them out here in my local forest. Pacific Goldens popped out mid-June and the White Chanterelles followed soon after. Take a look at this. Right here, we've got just that. This is just a hint of the White Chanterelle, Cantharellus subalbidus, hiding, just kind of lurking underneath the moss and in the forest stuff out here. This is a forest dominated by Douglas fir. Let's give this guy a little tug. What a beauty. Just look at this stout little White Chanterelle. This is right up there with my favorite of the mushrooms that I'm out here foraging in my local forests here in Western Washington. Look at that little spider. Some of you may have remembered seeing that in the last video that I put out. These little black spiders tend to show up in tandem with these White Chanterelles. Let me know if that's something you've observed too. I think that they've got an interesting little mutualistic symbiosis going on. There's the stipe. We'll tuck that in and check back on this spot as the season progresses. But what a bounty that's being had out here. I've already consumed pounds of chanterelles, and we're only mid-July, so it'll be interesting to see as we get further along into late summer, early fall. I can only keep my fingers crossed and hope that the bounty continues. So with it being early in the season, I figured let's see what we can do to help viewers pin down potential areas where you're likely to encounter White Chanterelles. And you know, as I referenced earlier, the idea is that you're looking for a Douglas fir dominant forest, and a lot of times it's going to be an older growth Douglas fir forest. But one thing that I tend to find also being near my White Chanterelles is this tree, the Western red cedar, just little saplings. Now, I don't believe that there's a mycorrhizal association going on there, but I do believe that the Western red cedar can indicate moisture levels in the soil. So it's weird how often I find these cedar saplings in the same areas as my White Chanterelle patches. So keep an eye out for that. And remember, take a look out here. Look how subtle this is. So easy to walk right by these mushrooms without even realizing that they're there. Oftentimes, even at maturity, they may not fully break through the moss or duff layer. Take a look. This is where the magic happens. There's something that never gets old about peeling back duff and moss to unveil Cantharellus subalbidus, one of my absolute favorite mushrooms to forage. Look at this. We'll clear this out. Give it a little tug. Boy, this never gets old. Look at that. What a beauty, right? So as I referenced, you know, we're here. We're mid-July. I'm about to leave town, so I don't know if this is going to get out mid-July or later this summer. But either way, you know, when you do lock in to a single White Chanterelle, don't be fooled into thinking that that's just a lone mushroom hanging out by itself. This always gives me pause. And, you know, I'm definitely going to keep this on the radar for later in the season. But I'm also Gonna really look right now. Look at this. I oftentimes try to change my perspective and just look for duff being pushed up, or even the slightest little hint of white poking through the needles, the mosses, the twigs. Look at this. Most of that totally hiding. But here it is. Let's give it a tug. Look at that. What a pristine mushroom that is. And you can hear and see how dry that is. Did you see how it just snapped off? And look at that crack right there. This guy just doing its thing. Doesn't even worry about precipitation or rain. But again, that's where I think, or I suspect, that those western red cedar saplings may indicate, hey, this is a good spot where moisture levels in the soil are sufficient to really support the mycelium. And, you can see where that broke off. So this is something where, I'm going to cover that up. I'll certainly poke back, but I'm also going to really get low to the ground, change my perspective or my line of sight, and just see if any more are catching my eyes. I have no doubt that I'm missing more than I'm detecting. So, but once I've got one of these spots pinned on the map, I don't tend to not check back, right? So this is a spot that I'll tend to monitor over the course of the next several weeks. And as is usually the case, there's going to be more and more of these popping up. And I'm sure that there are several that I'm not able to detect right now that are still kind of active, doing their thing. So be interesting to keep tabs on that. For now, we'll just fill these spots in. And remember to check back. And I figured it would be good to check back on a spot that I featured in the last video. Take a look down here. Some of you may remember last time I left this little pair of pins. So I trimmed some white chanterelles in front of there. You can see that yellowing or staining where it was disturbed. I get the sense that these aren't going to grow too much bigger. So interesting to check back on these. They may have gotten a little more growth since I left them, but not a ton. Now, this little slope at first glance doesn't really look like there's that much going on here. And that may well be the case, but I've been hunting white chanterelles enough to know. Yeah, look at this. Right down here. It's just a matter of slowing down. Looking more closely, look at this. Isn't this something? There's something just so satisfying about that process from start to finish. Look at this little cluster. Beautiful. Look at that. 3 little perfect, stout, fused white chanterelles just wanting to come home with me and find their way into the pan. And I suspect that these guys are not alone. There's probably plenty more, some of which I'm sure I'll be able to detect, others that I won't. But boy, just look at that. Not huge, but not small either. Figure we'll go ahead and tuck these in, take another look. And wouldn't you know it, so here's the original couple of clusters that we targeted a second ago. And as I just kind of peruse this little berm a little more carefully, take a look just back here behind this fern. Let me see if I can get this into focus for you. And this is subtle. This is really subtle. But do you see how that moss is kind of slightly uplifted? Maybe difficult to see through the lens, but look at this. Just a tiny little white chanterelle just starting to break out here. Now it's interesting. So it's very possible that, a week or two back when I was out here foraging and picking white chanterelles from this very spot, it's possible that these were here and I just didn't see them. But, one thing that's really interesting about white chanterelles, I kind of have a theory that a little bit of pruning and foraging sometimes tends to seem to spur growth. You look at that, there's another one there. So maybe it even stimulates the mycelium to really start to kick out mushrooms. What do you think about that? And okay, so the pile is slowly starting to grow. And again, the slower that I move, and the more closely that I look, and as I get kind of different perspectives or different angles or lines of sight on this mossy slope, I'm seeing more. I'm sure you can see this one right here. This could at times serve as an initial flag. Some of these are obvious to see. Look at that. There goes the spiders again, hanging out in there. But you can see, not huge, but for this time of year, what a delicacy, what a treat. There are patches that I will oftentimes observe one or two small little mushrooms that I'll leave completely untouched. But this one, it's interesting, just kind of testing this theory about potentially stimulating growth from actually harvesting the ones that I see. It really does seem like this is like spurred more of a flush than I may otherwise have encountered if I hadn't been out here a week or two prior. So kind of interesting. Is that one? Nope. Faked out by a stick, but let's see what else we can kind of come up with here. So here's one more down here. And again, they start to pop out. I could have sworn that I looked right here in front of these a second ago. But as I look more closely, check this out. Look at this. So subtle. But there they are, and it looks like not just one. How many do we have here? There's one. There's another. Stout little guy. And who knows how many more are hiding out here. Let's give it another look and see. Oh yeah, look at this. There's another. How easy would it have been to just kind of simply see that one or two and pluck those and move right along? But again, pays to really just kind of slow down, closely examine, change your angles, your lines of sight. And it's amazing how much these will cluster and group together. So we'll kind of keep looking, see what we see out here. And of course, it doesn't stop here. Look at this. Here's another right here. So, it's always interesting, that debate over, I can see a little one right next to this too. Again, I'm going to leave some of these. These are getting on the small side now. So I think some of these smaller little clusters I'm going to leave. But what a haul for this time of year, mid-July. Such a great encounter. It's funny because I really do think of these white chanterelles as kind of the great teachers. They're out here always encouraging me to slow down. Sometimes I'll actually sit down right on the forest floor and just look and observe closely in these spots where I know they are. A lot of times this turns into a process that's almost more meditative than anything else. So it kind of transcends the classic kind of hunting or foraging idea and turns into more of a meditation to just slow down, move slow, and merge with the forest. And that theory or idea that we're targeting these mature Doug fir dominant forests, but also really focusing our attention on the western red cedar saplings, that kind of blows in the face of kind of typical foraging lore when it comes to these wild edible mushrooms that we're all after, because as I'm sure several of you know, the western red cedar is not known to have any mycorrhizal associations with the mushrooms that we're after. In fact, these trees actually contain antifungal compounds. So a lot of times people will breeze through the cedar forests and kind of write them off entirely when it comes to foraging. So, and I'm not suggesting by any stretch that these white chanterelles are working with the root system here of these western red cedars. But what I am saying is that we've got these large, mature Douglas fir forests, and, you know, we've got our typical ground cover. We've got some salal, some ferns, lots of moss. And a lot of times when we've got that proper setup, those western red cedar saplings, I have that theory that, hey, maybe those are indicating adequate soil moisture that really makes for the perfect habitat for the mycelial growth of these white chanterelles. So, you know, if this is something that you have experience with, or even if you don't, keep an eye out for it. And by all means, if you've had similar encounters, if you've had good luck with the white chanterelle, and you found the western red cedar nearby, I'd be really curious to hear from you in the comments. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are on this. Maybe I'm crazy, maybe it's nothing, but maybe, just maybe, it might be something. Keep an eye out. And it is really funny because once you start seeing, you know, whether it's Pacific golden chanterelles or white chanterelles, every little blemish on the mossy forest floor starts to look like a chanterelle. But these salal leaves really kind of throw a wild card into the mix because they have an uncanny ability to mimic both of those chanterelles depending on their condition or state. But for as much as these salal leaves can kind of throw us off, they also tend to be one of the key indicators. It would be unusual to be stumbling across massive patches of chanterelles without seeing salal nearby. So a lot of times when I see these, I'll pause and look. And just to keep your eyes peeled for both the white chanterelle and the Pacific golden, take a look at what we've got here, looking just like a salal leaf. Here's our classic Pacific golden chanterelle, Cantharellus formosus. This, of course, the stout summer version. And again, barely breaking through the duff, kind of similar to those white chanterelles that we were looking at just a second ago. And this is, mind you, just a matter of feet from where I was pulling white chanterelles. So these really don't, you know, discriminate or don't look for isolation from one another. They'll tend to oftentimes sprout up in the exact same habitat, same forest, same elevation, all that good stuff. And again, as was the case with the other chanterelles that we've pursued, it would be unusual that one of these would show up all by its lonesome. So I suspect, whether I'm able to see it or not, I have no doubt that there's a friend nearby. So again, as referenced earlier, notice I'm getting low to the ground and really looking much more closely than I was a second ago. And this is where it gets fun, because you know that they're there. They've got to be. Sometimes I'll make a deal with myself that I can't leave an area till I find a second chanterelle. Could be here a long time. We'll see. All right, so I'm still here with my lone chanterelle. And for all the doubters out there, you know there's a second one nearby. And we're looking. And I'll tell you what, I just spotted something out here. I wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of look at it through the same lens, same angle as I was a second ago. And it sounds funny, you know, to really kind of commit to finding a second chanterelle, especially after you've spent a couple minutes looking. But more often than not, they're there. Do you see anything? Super subtle. Look at that. Tiniest little speck of chanterelle orange/yellow. And lo and behold, here's the friend. So it's not too far along. You can see why this took a little while to spot. Give it a tug here. And look at that, poking up through the moss and duff. It's bigger than you might think just from the surface, right? Because of the sheer layer or thickness of the moss, right? So better size than you might think at first glance. But still, not the biggest chanterelle, but happy to add it to today's collection. And you know, I would also wager a bet that there's probably a third one out here too. I don't know that I'm willing to die on that sword or to invest more time poking around for it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's another one. So again, I'll keep my eye on this spot in the weeks ahead, and surely there are more to come. And whenever I feel like I'm going to be getting into a fair volume of mushrooms, I try to throw the Opinel in the pocket. It's nice that it's got this little brush. These guys are so dry, it's funny. A lot of the duff and debris and needle litter that's stuck to these is pretty well caked on here. But you can see as I'm brushing this off, it's some of it is coming off all right, others are not. I'll show you too how I kind of field dress this. Now, mind you, I'm doing this at a weird angle to try to get it on the camera. Ordinarily, I'd be standing up and just trying to take the edge of this blade and just get that outermost layer. Oftentimes at the base here, squeak, 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 we'll give it a firm cut. But notice that because these aren't the biggest chanterelles, I'm being somewhat mindful of the volume that I'm taking off. I'm not wanting to take off more than is necessary to field dress it. Again, these little scraps and pieces at the base of these mushrooms, I'll then find a spot, maybe just 40, 50, 100 feet from where I am now, that looks suitable, and I'll replant the stub or the base in the hopes that potentially I'll be able to expand the range or distribution of one of my favorite mushrooms, the Pacific golden chanterelle. So just up the trail here, we've got a really interesting site. Check this out. So not to gross anyone out, but we've got a rodent carcass up here, and much like the role of fungi in the forest, these insects also play a vital role in that whole process of decomposition. And this little beetle that we're looking at here, this colorful black and orange beetle, I believe is what's known as the round neck Sexton beetle. You see one on top, one on bottom. This is a super interesting little insect that is really closely linked to carcasses of small animals, things like rodents, birds, and other things. And what really stands out to me is that this is especially valuable to forensic entomologists that are trying to figure out post-mortem interval, or PMI. Let me swing around, let's get a better view. So take a look here, isn't this amazing? Look at those little mites crawling on this round-neck Sexton beetle. Those little mites will actually use these as a transportation vehicle. And here's what's interesting is the male beetles, once they've discovered a carcass, they'll oftentimes release pheromones, and then the females will come in, at which point they'll kind of do their thing. They'll consume some of the fly larvae. So the flies are actually the first insects to get, generally speaking, to get access to these carcasses. But then these other insects will feed on the larvae and pupae and eggs. So these mites are actually feeding on the eggs of the flies that were here previously. And similarly, these beetles are doing their thing. Now again, these forensic entomologists know that once they lay their eggs, it'll just be a certain number of hours before the beetle eggs hatch. So it can be a really useful tool in determining the time of death for whatever carcass you happen to find these on. Kind of fascinating, right? And take a look at this. I just spooked this barred owl as I was running up this trail. He was actually pretty much right on the trail. Seems to be actively hunting. We'll kind of creep around here and see how close we can get to him. Interesting to see him active during the day like this, doing his thing. This forest has a large number of both barred owls and great horned owls. At one point in time, this was actually inhabited by the spotted owl, but these barred owls have actually, over time, displaced the spotted owl, which for quite some time was a big deal. Wow, let's take a look here. Either way though, barred owl, always a pleasure to bump into as well. Look at that. What a good looking bird. Out here doing his thing. Sitting on this old western hemlock snag. They have an incredible ability to locate sound. So I'm sure a lot of you know that their ears are positioned at slightly different heights, so they can use a form of triangulation to try to pinpoint where the rustle of leaves or the movement of rodents is taking place. He's just intent on figuring out more info on me or on some prey. Either way, fun to see. And just up here, we've got another very familiar sight. This is one of our deer mushrooms in the Pluteus cervinus group. There is another similar one to Pluteus cervinus, which is Pluteus exilus. Both of those are out here. But in general, several species that are close enough that they go under that same generic group name. We can see this growing out of a red alder log that's pretty well decayed. In fact, in a not too distant video, we actually investigated this exact log. Notice that the cap of this deer mushroom is a little bit velvety or soft. Now, this is actually an edible mushroom. If I give it a tug, we'll take a look at some of the core characteristics. So again, whoa! This thing was so dry that it snapped right off. But look underneath here. So this is key. We've got free gills. So notice that the gills are not attached to the stipe. You'll also notice a light pink color. These have light pink spores. And I'm kind of surprised as I look at this. Notice we've got these blade-like gills. Normally these will be chock full of springtails and other little insects. These are known for tasting sort of like radishes, so by no accounts are these even remotely close to being a choice edible. But as I've referenced in the past, you know, a commenter on a video that I posted a long time ago referenced how in Europe these are oftentimes referred to as war mushrooms, because during World War II, when food was scarce and resources were tough to come by, those could be found in abundance, and they were consumed readily. Oh, check this out. So I actually thought that this was another deer mushroom, but it's not. This is kind of a strange deal. Look at this. So that's actually the underside of an artist conch. And you can see how it's regrown. So this log was rolled over. So the old undersurface is pointed up, and we can see the new growth further to the left there. That's Ganoderma applanatum. And just up here, we've got what, well, may be my all-time favorite mushroom. This is what's commonly referred to as the West Coast Reishi, Ganoderma oregonense. Look at that little alien finger-looking protrusion. So this is coming out of a western hemlock. Notice that it's got this red, shiny color to it that has this varnished appearance. Sometimes this is referred to as the varnished conch. Now, it'll oftentimes have this orangish or yellow band between the red and the white outer edge or margin of the cap. So this is just beginning to grow out. And again, as I referenced, this is growing from a western hemlock. Sometimes I'll also find them growing from Douglas fir, although I gotta say, at least 90% of the West Coast Reishis that I find or encounter here in Western Washington are growing from western hemlock. And this is one of my favorites. It's one of our medicinal mushrooms. This is one that I consume on a regular basis as a tonic. Now, one thing that makes this unique is that, see this white outer margin? So a lot of these conchs that we encounter out here in the Pacific Northwest will be really firm. The one that we looked at just a second ago, the artist conch, that's also in the Ganoderma genus, but that one's rock hard. This one is going to kick out this soft white outer margin in the late summer months. And what I'll sometimes do, and this one is not far enough along for me to consider it, but this is a very soft outer band that's actually edible. A lot of people don't realize this. And unlike other conchs, this is just a seasonal thing. It's going to be out late summer, early fall, and then it's going to waste away. But sometimes I'll actually trim that outer margin and cook it up and add it to different meals. It cooks up similar to kind of like bacon or tofu, and it's a delicious, healthy little treat that I look forward to each year. Keep an eye out for this one. And just up the trail here, we've got an interesting sight. This is a plant that we talked about in a recent video. This is what's commonly referred to as the Baldhip Rose. And if we look at it, it's done with its flowering stage at this point, at least in this part of the forest. And look how it's starting to kick out these little fruits. These are known as the rose hips. And these are oftentimes foraged. You can see one that's a darker red color back there. But these are oftentimes foraged after the first hard frost that we'll get in the fall time. And these are really high in vitamin C. They're very flavonoid rich. And they're used a lot of times in different preparations, in teas and medicines and different things. They're oftentimes sought out as a really kind of unique and special part of the forest out here. So keep an eye out for those, always fun to see. And you know, the day just wouldn't be complete without at least mention of a plasmoidal slime mold. This is the dog vomit slime mold, Fuligo septica. And look at how vibrant and colorful this is. I always love bumping into these guys out in the forest. And we've talked about these at length in videos past, so I won't go into a lot of details right now, but I'll simply say that these add so much to the forest experience out here, and if you haven't looked into them, give them a look. They're interesting creatures. It's now Friday, August 7th. We just got a couple days of decent rain, and so I decided to return to the forest. And once again, I'm kind of scouring the ground underneath these little cedar saplings. And look at what I'm seeing. I love bumping into these guys. This is going to be another great year for these white chanterelles. Look at this. Look at that. They're loving that extra little bit of moisture. wonderful to be bumping into these guys. Let me see if I can get this guy into focus here. Look at that. Really doing well. And I'll tell you what, if you haven't been looking for these, this is prime time, especially after this rain. These are going to be really coming up in the days ahead, so don't forget to keep an eye out for that flash of white. And once more, in and amongst the salal, underneath Doug fir, but more importantly, right at the foot of these western red cedar saplings, look at what we've got. Brilliant white. Look at how vibrant this guy looks. Let's give it a tug. Beautiful, pristine, stout little white chanterelle. This has got me hungry just looking at it. Oh man, so excited for what's to come out here. We can see the core down there. We'll go ahead, tuck it in, make that mental mark on our mental map. Certainly be back, and in the meantime, I'm going to scour this area, see what else we see, but boy, they are out. And I was just checking up on a familiar patch that I visited weeks ago. And look what I see at the base of this Doug fir under the salal this time. Surely this was out last time I was out here, or I would suspect. But it looks like I missed it. Give it a tug, take a look. Yeah, and I can tell by the kind of golden color on the cap, developed ridge-like gills or gill structures underneath, a little mold up top. I'm gonna need to trim that. So it looks like that one's been out for a while. I missed it. And I'll tell you what, if you missed the previous episode from earlier this year on summer chanterelles, or even last year on white chanterelles, give it a look. Until next time, happy trails.